Hey everyone, you're listening to the Engineering Politics Podcast. Today I talked to Deb Fillman of The Reason We Learn community. I should have had this conversation a long time ago. Deb is a former educator, current parent, and future YouTube star. At least that's what I think. In this podcast, we dive into the current state of the educational system in the United States, and we cover a ton of ground here. And we also take some questions at the end because we did this on a live stream on Deb's channel. You can find Deb on the YouTubes by searching The Reason We Learn. You can also support her and join her locals community at thereasonwelearn.locals.com, and you can follow her on Twitter at InsomnoChick. And now where can you find me? You can follow me on Twitter at ENG_politics. You can find me on YouTube by searching Engineering Politics, and you can follow my ThinkSpot page by going on the ThinkSpot and searching Engineering Politics. And you can support me on Locals, where you can get exclusive content, including my new video series called Another Round of Kevin, by going to engineeringpolitics.locals.com. I'd appreciate the support. All right, that's it. Let's get to the live stream with Deb and talk about education. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast.
Okay, and now we're live.
Awesome.
That easy, right? It was that easy. Okay.
Something that easy.
I was actually scared about how easy this was the first time I did it. All right, we got four pairs of eyeballs. If you're here in the house, please say hello to us in the chat. There we go. Hopefully that didn't come across. Did you hear that? I had to mute it.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, no, mine was on loud too. So
yeah, it's like there's a delay and then you're like, oh, right, mute. All right. So welcome to people who are showing up. Hopefully there are some. Just give it a minute. How was your day so far?
Good. I'm glad I took the dogs for a walk. I got two dogs. So one is an 11-year-old and one is a 6-month-old. So like very, very different ages and energy levels for sure. So I took them out for their walk, and the week leading up to this, I have pretty bad seasonal allergies. So it's like 2 weeks or a week or two at the beginning of the year, beginning of the season, and at the end of the season is when I get hit really bad. And I had it bad last week. Like if we had scheduled this a week prior, I probably would have had to cancel. It was so bad.
Like people outside think you have COVID bad, like that.
Well, like you're like, I mean, people who, well, it's sneezing. So like I'm a sneezer that if I sneeze, I'll blow this mic. So I gotta like point the other direction. I'm so loud. But when you do it in a store, it's like you need to find a space. Even if I'm sneezing into my inside of my elbow, I got to find a space where there is no one, because no one trusts me with a mask on going into my elbow that I'm not getting just spray particles everywhere. So I don't want people to freak out, especially I live in an extremely progressive part of the Midwest. So everyone there is probably going to
people like
kick me out or something.
Scatter.
They just So it's a true event. But right before this, I took them out. Then my eyes started to get itchy, so I put in eye drops right before this. And now it feels great, and I'm so happy because it would have been a nightmare.
Awesome.
Go through that.
All right. So welcome to those of you who are here. We're going to get started now that we know this is all working properly. This is we hope, right, that this is going to become like a regular collaboration. We're kind of hoping it's a little test thing. Yeah. But so I'm Deb from The Reason We Learn, and this is Kevin from Engineering Politics. Those of you who are here on my channel know me and know why I'm here. But Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, what you do, your work, and how it is that we came to meet?
Yeah, so I used to run a website, but now it's mostly just a community called Engineering Politics. So I'm on all the fun stuff, the Twitters, the YouTube, stuff like that. But mostly I house my stuff on locals.com, same place as you do. So engineeringpolitics.locals.com is where you can find me there. I'm also on thinkspot.com, which is another similar type platform. But I am a conservative content creator that tries to explain conservative principles in a way that someone who does not identify as conservative can understand, and at least can see where conservative comes from. Because too often now do we have this media run fallacy as to what a conservative is. And it is it's just nowhere near it, right? It's just they think it's the party of racism and all this fun stuff. And it's like, well, obviously you're just misrepresenting anything. So I try to do it in a way that is easier for people to understand, even though they don't want to buy into the ideology. And one point that I always try to make clear, although I think we're going to bring up a piece that defies it a little bit, is I try to do this in a more non-provocative way. It's easy to be a conservative content creator who goes against the mainstream, which is liberalism at best, wokeism at worst. And I do it in a way, not just, I don't want to be provocative for provocation's sake, because that just shuts people off. You know, people, you make a joke at them, it's red meat for the people who already like it, but it just turns off the people who don't like it. And what I want to do is, I don't need you to come over to my side, but I would like you to understand what my side actually believes. That way we can actually start a real conversation. So that's what I attempt to do. That's a bit different than your typical conservative content creator.
What do you think is currently the biggest misconception, other than it's the racist side or whatever? Yeah. What do you think are some of the other misconceptions people have about conservatives? So when people think, oh, that's a conservative commentator, what do you think might be turning people off besides that? Like, because there's a layer underneath, you have people who are just knee jerk and go, that's where all the racists are. And of course they're wrong. But then there are other things below that I find that people I think are mistaken about. But what do you think those things are for you?
So it's hard to distill conservatism down into just one monolithic person, right? There's a whole different, diverse, as the kids call it nowadays, except for it's actually applied in its true meaning here. Not all of us hold the same beliefs, but I think one of the biggest misconceptions about a lot of conservatives, especially the modern day conservative, is all they're trying to do is conserve the status quo. Right. Because conservative means you must conserve something. And that's why I argue against progressives that say we want progress. It's like, well, where are you progressing to? You can progress to a lot of bad places. So you want to define what you're progressing towards. And conservatism in my context is not conserving the status quo, but it is conserving the principles that made America the way it is. Right. So this individual freedom and liberty, and wanting those things to stay with us and make sure we don't abandon those principles for something else. Right. So I think that's the biggest misconception, is this, you just want things to stay the way they are. Well, no, I want things to change. I just don't want our principles to change with it. I don't want to feel open. I feel bad when people are mistreated. You can say that I'm tolerant of those who think differently than me, but I don't believe in this absolute maximum tolerance that I tolerate ideas that will come in and not tolerate my own. Right. So I want to conserve the idea of this viewpoint diversity, but I don't want to change my principles. I don't want to give up freedom for some false sense of security or something like that.
Well, it sounds like you're interested to hear viewpoint diversity, but you're not going to tell people that it's all relative. We have, I heard Dan Crenshaw talk once on his podcast, We Hold These Truths, which is excellent, by the way. I highly recommend it. And one of the reasons I like it is that if you are interested in the kind of conservatism that Kevin is describing, that's what you're going to find there. It's very fact-based. He gets experts on to talk about the issues of the day, whether it's climate science, border security, whatever it is. We are going to be hearing from people who are experts actually doing whatever it is, and they're going to talk about it using evidence and facts. It's not this red meat stuff, right? And at the same time, what I loved is when he defined conservatism, he said pretty much what you said. He said there are limiting principles. There's like a wall. And so you're open to hear all information or suggestions or even, policy proposals about anything, to solve any kind of problem we face as a society. But you have this limiting principle of individual liberty and the things in the Bill of Rights. Those are the limiting principles. That's kind of the line that conservatives will not cross. So I'll hear what you have to say, but if what you're proposing is going to step on those rights, then no, there's not a compromise. That's the conserving those liberties is the wall. Whereas when you think of progressivism, and we're seeing it now with this woke stuff, it's kind of like it's like a snowball rolling downhill. If you always have to be changing, like because change is perceived as always good, and you don't have a limiting principle on the other side saying, except for this, like we're not, we can change unless it does anything to this wall of principle. There isn't one. And that's why conservatives oppose progressivism, so to speak, is that, no, I can't go there with you because you're saying change for change's sake is good. And then unless we're moving forward, whatever forward could be off a cliff, right? Sometimes you need to stop and be like, nope, that's a cliff. So that's what I'm hearing you say about your definition of conservatism is a limiting set of principles that cause you to pause and say, I don't think so. Come back with another idea.
Yeah, the constant state of change is not something that's desirable by everyone. So, when we talk about freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's not always about just limiting certain things, but just understanding the ideas of the founders. And freedom, liberty, we get that, and then we say pursuit of happiness, and people think, well, that's government promised happiness. It's like, no, the important word there is pursuit. It is purpose. It is to find what makes you happy. Right. They want to allow you to figure out what makes you happy and to pursue that goal, not just provide you happiness, because you'll find out that they can't do that.
And that's and it's the pursuit of your individual happiness. There's really no other kind. There's no such thing. People don't experience life as groups. And I know that the current, the zeitgeist says they do, but they really don't. And the contradiction is, well, we're going to talk about lived experiences, and those are always done at the individual level. It's like the only time that people are allowed to be individuals when they're talking about their lived experience, as long as that lived experience supports the narrative. But the second it doesn't, no, it's groups. And conservatives, that as I understand it and the way you're defining it, conservatives are saying, nope, that life is lived as an individual, and your pursuit of happiness is pursued individually. No one is really going to walk that walk with you, and except your family members and your friends. And even they're going to, go this way and that. They're not literally walking in your shoes. So if you are not free to do that, you're not free, period. It's like that's also not to say you should be, what I've heard as a sort of a libertarian person. I don't call myself conservative, not because I don't agree with you, because I agree with every single thing you just said 100%. By your definition, I am a conservative. But when you start talking politically, because people hear that word now and they think Republican, like party, they think about very specific things, anti this or anti that or pro this or pro that. And I'm like, no, I'm an individualist. First and foremost, above anything else, like my number one principle in life is individual liberty, because that's the smallest minority there is. So if whatever you're talking about doesn't support that, forget it. But that doesn't mean hedonism. Then people hear that and I get flack for, so everybody should be able to do whatever they want. I'm like, remember I said limiting principles? Limiting principles put up a pretty big wall against anything I want, right? I can't trample your rights. I can't infringe on your rights. I can't rob you. I can't, I can't physically hurt you or aggress against you or, lie to you or defraud you. Or that's why we have government, is to protect those rights, right? Not to give us stuff. So I think that's where people kind of mess it up, is they think conservative equals, I want to tell you what to do with this segment of your life. And they think, libertarian means whatever, it's a free for all. And it's like, no, it's not a free for all.
There's a problem, because there's always, there are some people who consider themselves conservatives who would go out and say, no, you're not allowed to do these things. And there are people in the libertarian movement who do say, do whatever you want, as long as you're not harming.
They're anarchists, right?
Right. And both extremes are not useful or helpful.
No.
But when we focus on those extremes, which is what everyone tends to do, because it's so much easier to beat up a straw man and not fight a steel man, right? So it's a very poor practice that we've developed over the last couple of years that probably, has something to do with social media and development like that. But I like the fact that you and I probably have disagreements on several different things. And then when you brought up how we met, I mean, we met through another creator that is another person that I'm sure you and I probably have different different opinions than she has. So you and I met in Carlin Barasinko's locals. And that's a place where a ton of people are meeting. And if you haven't gone there, I think it's just Carlin at locals.com or something like that. You can throw it up there if you remember what it is, but
I can get it.
Yeah. So she's got, these weekly chats where like a whole bunch of people from her community come together and just talk. And it's nice because she sort of sets the tone right away, but then kind of lets everyone speak. And it's a conversation between all of us, not just us talking with her and her responding. So it's really nice. And that's where I met you there. I met you, I started creating my content when I first got my locals channel or my locals community. So I didn't make any content prior to then. But when I was in Carlin's, I remember you speaking up and you having all these great ideas, especially about education. And I'm like, that's someone who really needs to create her own community. And I know I side chatted you then. And then I think that's when you started creating your own stuff. And it's been amazing since then. So I really appreciate what you're doing. I think you and Carlin are great examples of people who don't just talk about doing things. You guys do things. And that's something that's super important, because I know that's a problem with people who consider themselves conservatives, is a lot of them tend to talk about these ideas and talk about individual liberty, but when it comes to defending them, they kind of don't do it. So, they stick there and they go in their own shell, and they're just like, oh, I'm just going to let the world burn and watch it from in here while I protect my family with all my guns. It's like, well, that's one way to do it, but eventually they're going to come knocking at your door and it's going to become a problem. So you need to be proactive as well.
Well, and we still have freedom of speech. So we still do. So as much as, I come on here every day and, rant and rave and light my hair on fire about the assault on reason that's going on all over this country, the reason I'm here is, while I still have my freedoms, I'm going to use them. Like, try to stop me. And so the thing that really inspired me, that when you were talking to me on Carlin's, and even Carlin has said repeatedly to potential creators out there or speakers, don't shy away from this. Use your freedom while you can. Use it, because if all of us do, if everybody who's out there in the woodwork thinking the same things we're saying spoke, instead of just keeping it inside their house, we're like, I really agree with them, but I don't want to say anything, we wouldn't have the problem. Like, we literally wouldn't have the problem. And this has probably been the case in most countries where these irrational, illiberal ideas have taken over. It's that small, very motivated groups didn't care what anyone thought and proceeded apace. Think about how little you have to care about what people think of you to be out there pushing critical race theory right now. I mean, think about that for a second. I want to go into schools and I want to teach, white people that they're oppressors and they were born that way. And I want to talk to a 5-year-old child in kindergarten and tell them that they're, they were born bad and they need to work on that. Like, how little do you have to give a damn what somebody thinks of you in order to, say that out loud? And then here we are saying, no, that sounds like child abuse. And people are like, oh, but I don't want to offend anyone. What? Like, people, no, that's not offensive. That's just reality. So what we have are people out there saying things that are objectively offensive, not afraid. And we have people saying things that are objectively not not offensive at all, who are afraid to speak. So when I was in that locals group, that's where I got the whole, you need to say something. And I did it. So I'm reaching out to anybody out there watching, or if you know somebody else, you don't have to be a content creator. If this isn't your bag, and I understand it's not for everybody, but you still have a voice within your community. You can go to school board meetings. You can write op-ed pieces. You can send, if you have information that would be helpful for Kevin's production or mine, send it to us and we'll help you. But you have something to say it. Like,
Absolutely.
don't shy away.
I think we're afraid that freedom of speech is going to be taken away from us via the government gun. That's not normally how these things work. Freedom of speech ends when we decide we don't want it anymore. That's normally the result of us saying, you know what, I don't want to offend people. Take this responsibility, because freedom in general, what people don't really understand is it's not something that everyone desires. Most countries don't have freedom because most people don't want it. It's too hard a burden. It is a large burden to carry, to take care of yourself. It's a scary thing. And you think of being a child, it's like, it's super difficult. When I was a child, it always reminds me of, I looked up on my parents or any adult. Like, if you're ever lost in a store, all you do is find an adult, because all adults know what to do. They know everything about the world. Why would an adult be able to tell you what to do? And the scary part is, when you become adult, you realize no one knows what they're doing. Nobody. It is amazing that you're driving on the street and not getting nailed by random cars, because it's like, wow, I have no idea how we're all fitting all this stuff together and not killing each other right now. So, freedom's a scary thing, and we got to realize that when we say freedom's being taken away, it's a serious thing. But don't always look to government like they're the ones doing it. It is people volunteering to to give their freedoms away to the government for a government-sponsored security, which we know from a lot of past governments, it does not work out well for them.
But that's the important point, what you just said. We know from a lot of past governments or from a lot of things in the past, we know because we either were taught history or we learned history. But what I'm noticing, and this is kind of what I focus on my channel and my locals, is that you only know what you've been taught or been exposed to, or increasingly what you've been told to be concerned about, what you've been told is important because of social media, 24-hour news cycle, et cetera. For example, people don't know that a white boy carrying an airsoft gun was killed by police, but what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago? He was accused of pointing it at the police with airsoft guns, so they killed him. Honor student. Didn't hear a word about it. Why? Eric July said on his YouTube, he said, because you weren't told to care about it. It happened. It was out there in the news. Even like Blip covered it in the news. But the reason there aren't protests and not saying there should be riots, okay? But the reason people aren't taking that into account to have the larger discussion about police use of force, which is an important discussion to have, period, right? And instead of this, it's only a racial discussion, is you weren't told to care. You may not even know what happened. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm defending people who are ignorant through no fault of their own. There's a certain segment of society who are out there who legit don't want freedom, who are like, nope, give me my stuff. I'm happy to do what I'm told and just give me my things. Okay. But I think there's a larger population that would want freedom if they knew what it was. Like if they knew the difference, if they had been told and educated or had this exposed to them when they had prime opportunity to do it, which is in school. You're in school for these 13 years and they tell you they're teaching history and they tell you they're doing these things. But if that's what you were told as history is, well, we don't cover Mao and we don't cover, how Hitler came to power, and we cover it for 5 minutes and we move on. How are you going to know?
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because I think to a certain extent, people inherently understand what freedom is and that there's a responsibility that comes with it. But what they don't understand is when you give that away to a third party like a government, it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to have your best interests in their favor. And it's a scary thing, because we always think, oh, well, if my health goes out the window, then, I can rely on nationalized healthcare to pick up the bill, when they don't realize, well, when you nationalize healthcare, all these other consequences come from it that may not have the certain type of healthcare you need available anymore. Or it's maybe hasn't even been invented yet, because there's no, profit incentive for these people to invent new drugs or new procedures and stuff like that. And it's that's the part that's hard to explain to people, especially when you don't explain history, or if you explain history through a more revisionist lens, where you try to kind of attribute motives that weren't actually there to push a narrative.
When you make government the savior in the story. So if your narrative about, for example, the Depression is FDR saved us, and you teach that to 2 or 3 generations of kids, they think government is a place or as a group of people that save us from, dire consequences, from problems. If we look back in history and we keep pointing to this president or that president or this administration, and, that's what saved us, and you don't dig deeper to look at what actually pulled us out from an economic standpoint. And I'm pretty sure this is in your wheelhouse, the whole economics of the situation. That's not so much my area of expertise. You will find that's not necessarily true. It's like, but that's the narrative. That's the story that kids, that's what I was taught. I had to learn as an adult, only because I'm interested in history and I was curious and had a lengthy conversation with my grandfather, who absolutely detested FDR. And I asked him one day, I said, why? And he was, my grandfather was born in 1896. He's deceased now, but he fought in 2 world wars and he absolutely hated the man. And I could not understand why, because in my school, it was like he was God, right? So he told me, he said he made it worse. And he began to give me the details as someone who lived it, who actually lived it and was old enough and working and out of graduate school and so forth when it happened, to be able to give me really clear examples from his own life about how these things impacted him. And it was like somebody turned on a light bulb in the attic. I said, wait a minute, maybe things I was taught aren't actually true.
Yeah.
And that's when I started looking into it.
Yeah. And it's fortunate that you have those influences around you, because not everyone gets those influences. For me, my parents weren't overtly political. So my, experiences came a lot from books. I have a picture of Thomas Sowell back here, and he's the one that kind of broke the ice for me. I've always been kind of conservative in demeanor, but someone just blasting facts and statistics from someone who's more analytical like myself, really, made sense. And it's like, once you bear down and look at the numbers, it's like you kind of understand history better that way.
Sure.
And when you're kind of taught it as, well, these people were feeling like this, these people were feeling like that, and then these people, made everything better. It's like that's a hard way to look at history from an objective standpoint. Diving into the numbers, empirical data, really helps. So
yeah, exactly.
That's what I enjoyed doing.
And it really opened my eyes a lot. And then in college, I learned more. I was an American Studies major, so that helped quite a bit because I got to dive really deep. I dove deep into the American Revolution, and I took an entire semester course on just the philosophical underpinnings of the revolution. And boy, was that an eye opener. And that was the next question I want to ask you is, do you think that one of the biggest things missing in our society today is any emphasis at all on having a personal philosophy, on actually deciding for yourself, what principles you live by, and then, living by them. So in other words, like back in the day when most people were religious, let's say, that would be their personal philosophy was in accordance with their faith. Usually, I mean, that is a form of a philosophy, a worldview, if you will. And as we've sort of secularized, I feel like nothing really replaced that. People just became anti-religion. It was kind of like, and I say this as a person who is not a person of faith, okay? But I recognize the value that it did provide as a structuring force, a stabilizing force in people's lives. That was like, I have this set of rules in my mind. I have this set of principles that guide my life. And I come back to them. I evaluate my decisions against it. I evaluate my choices against it. And that it, to a large degree, helped people, with that structure. And that had nothing to do with government. You know what I mean? It's just inside your own head, right? But as we moved away from that as a society and kind of secularized, I feel like nothing replaced it. People didn't go and say, okay, well, now I'm going to find this. I did. I read Ayn Rand, and I wouldn't say I'm a capital O objectivist, but I definitely follow those principles. I evaluate my choices against those principles. So that for me is mine. Other people have a different kind of philosophy, but I notice a lot of people, and too many of them in positions of leadership, who are so easily manipulated and swayed into doing things in a compromise, or well, let's just do this, or they'll believe the absurd because they don't seem to have any kind of core, and
there's no value structure there.
There's nothing there.
And I get what you mean, because values are going to be inherited, right? Not biologically inherited, but inherited through your experiences. And I think it's interesting you bring up someone like Ayn Rand, who figured out, and I'm very far from an Ayn Randian type capitalist, but
right.
I understood what she did. What she did is she took a lesson from the Bible and she explained her philosophy via narrative, because that's what the Bible is, a collection of stories. And that is why it is so effective in kind of translating those principles to other people, is because it's done via narrative. You can't tell people about principles and just say, principles are this because just, that's it. That's what it is. It ends there. You have to have some sort of narrative that goes with it to make it believable. And that's what Ayn Rand did there. And I think we are losing that sense. And this comes from, full disclosure, someone who is religious, who my worldview is, I think, I call myself conservative. I would never call myself a Christian conservative or something like that, because I don't want to have my politics and religion come into conflict like that. I don't want to use it as some sort of bulwark against other political opinions, but it is my worldview, right? So when people say, why is racism wrong? My response is because God made us in his image. That's why racism is wrong. Like, I can't treat someone who's got a different skin tone than me, someone who I wouldn't treat my own brother, because that is not what I'm called to do. That is not how I look at that person as that individual. And I think the farther we move away from there, the easier it is to say, well, it's just another person. And if they're not forwarding your values of society as a whole, and this is a big problem with collectivism, and this is something that someone like Ayn Rand does defend against in her own way, is you try to say, all right, what's best for you, even if you don't know what's best for you. That's a big problem. And I can see people who do things that are not in their best interest, but that's a learning opportunity from them. And maybe it is in their best interest. We don't know. It's up to the individual to figure out what they ought to do to meet their goals. And if your goals are to control other people's lives, it's a bad goal, and you're not going to be able to do it. And the best way to do it, the most effective way to do it, is through tyranny, unfortunately.
And I think that's what I'm talking about, is that when I don't know how many people have sat back or even taught their children, whether it's with a faith or not, is it moral to want to control the lives of other people? Think about that for a second. When is it and when isn't it? And I think these are conversations that need to be had. And you can call it what you want, but it's still philosophy. Okay, you're figuring out your morals, your ethics, and your worldview. And what we're doing now, I think, is kids in particular, I see this in the schools with all this curriculum stuff, they're being taught a worldview, but it's not one that is based in reality. It's not one that uses reason to, access the information. Even Christianity, okay, and even in the Bible, you could take, with the exception of the mystical aspects, okay, you could take the lessons that are in there and they could hold up pretty well to scrutiny by people using just reason and logic. It is not in anyone's rational self-interest to kill, to steal, to commit adultery, to do all the things that are in the 10 Commandments, right? So even evaluated in a strictly secular, objective standpoint, like, yeah, this makes sense, and it follows my values too, right? I don't need to have a mystical figure to do that. But I don't think people are doing that with children. They're creating this, as James Lindsay calls, a pseudo reality, the pseudo logic, and a pseudo morality to go with it. And the reason they can is that a lot of these people have nothing there to begin with. It's a blank slate. If you try to go up against somebody who has, part of why this was so immediately obvious to me that this is BS, is I have a framework. I have a philosophy. Most people who readily recognize that this is garbage have a philosophy of some kind that is grounded in reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I think the woke here is doing is it's replacing religion effectively. Well, what we'd say traditional religion. I think, and I've explained, I've been doing a review of Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer, and he goes through, what causes the rise and fall of mass movements, and he explains it in a very religious way, because he even throws Christianity in there. I'm a Christian, but I'm not one to say that Christians have done things exclusively right. The whole history of Christianity, obviously, that's not true, because it's a bunch of people doing it. But he has all of these markers as to what a mass movement, especially a religious mass movement, hits. And wokeism, what I would call wokeism or leftism, whatever you call it today, hits every single marker, for the exception of one. I can explain why, but hits every marker of a religion, and I would argue a corrupt religion. So it provides purpose. That's what it is attempting to do, is provide purpose. And one of the big missing markers it has compared to other mass movements we've seen throughout the decades is it doesn't have a leader. There is no one specific leader in leadership, and that is because it is also parasitic in nature. I think Gad Saad wrote a book, that the Parasitic Mind, which is really good, and he explains it, really, really well, that why would you want to lead a parasite that's going to eventually kill the host? Like, you don't want to be in that spot, because you're just going to be one of the next people taken out. So no one wants to assume that role, but it still acts in a religious nature that provides people this purpose, this sense of happiness when they get to, I'm sorry about the whole dogs yelp in the background, but that is effectively what it's doing in our society. Yeah. And it's going to lead people down a path where they're going to be depressed, because unless they're going to manufacture more of the I would say kind of the heart blood of their religion, which is going to be this kind of oppression narrative. They manufacture this stuff to make sure that they have, more oppression to go around, because that's the basis of their religion.
Right. And one of the things that I did want to talk about today, because, and going along with the parasitic nature of it and the sort of destructive nature, there's nothing constructive about this current movement. Okay. It's absolutely 100% destructive, and they don't even propose something to replace all these things that they want to tear down. And one of the things I've noticed, and you wrote an article about it, that they've torn down really successfully, and it's been going on for a long time. It's not brand new this year or anything like that, is the concept of the role of men. Just there's an assault on sort of gender norms and sexual identity and so forth in general, but with very specific focus, as I see it, even as a woman, against men. And I thought we could talk about that a little bit because you wrote a piece, and I wanted to bring that up for people to just see, that what it is. It's on Medium.
Yeah, so I originally published this on my own website, and the title's different because a lot of people got stuck on the title. Just like I said before, the original title of this piece is Why Boys Shouldn't Cry. And it was a much more provocative, and it was kind of meant to be that way, provocative to get people thinking in a different way before they got to the rest of the piece. But right in the first paragraph, I already explained, it's like, don't just take the title, like actually, read through it and kind of understand, where I'm coming from here. But
right.
What I was attempting to do here is kind of a version of the heuristic of Chesterton's fence. So Chesterton's fence is, you find a fence in the middle of nowhere. What he would call, I think, modern day reformer looks at the fence and being like, this fence does not need to be here. Let's take it down. But the more intellectual or intelligence type of reformer is going to say, well, why is it here? Why it was put here for a reason. Let's figure out its purpose. Let's figure out why this fence was erected in the first place. So this is kind of a heuristic on second order thinking, where it's like, again, like I explained before, your actions have consequences, but those consequences also have consequences. So they did the same thing with what they call toxic masculinity, but they're really throwing masculinity as a whole. They're saying, all right, this thing's old, let's throw it out. But they never actually looked at it to say, why was it here in the first place? What utilitarian purpose did it serve to get us up to this point? Because when you look at it that way, you realize that it's not toxic masculinity, it's toxic behavior that we want to get rid of. So, I explained to you before we started talking, there's kind of a small example that I have from my own personal past, and that is, I thought it was more masculine when I first met my fiance. We both had kids from previous relationships, and I always told her, it's like, I don't want more kids. I don't really like kids. I don't like being around kids. And for some reason, I thought that was like a masculine thing to say. Like, I thought, men are supposed to be more off-putting, more, let the women deal with the children, right? Which I guess is the toxic masculine behavior, if you're going to call it anything. But, my thing was just like, I'm going to pretend to be more off-putting. In truth, I love kids. Like, I kids love me. I like playing with kids. I don't think I'll ever be a teacher or anything like that. But once I kind of moved past that, once my fiance and I got serious and we're going to get married and have another kid, it's like, why? I'm not going to keep up this fake facade of being a tough guy who doesn't want to be around kids. Like, I love them. So it's something that I learned to move past as a form of toxic behavior, not toxic masculinity, because that is nowhere near the definition of masculinity to say you must be turned off by children. Like, that's not in there. Men are fathers, and fathers must, by definition, be able to focus on the children as well. So, that's a good example of something that, I would say it's a toxic behavior we should toss out the window. Sure, it's right. Toxic behavior, but it is not masculinity, and there's a big difference.
No, and nobody wants to talk about what I would call toxic. What if you're going to use these crazy terms that don't really relate to what they are, toxic femininity, but it isn't. Again, it's toxic behavior. If we could get away from these notions of femininity and masculinity and just focus on that's why I said the philosophy. It's like, what is a life-sustaining, rights-respecting behavior or set of behaviors, and what isn't? What supports your life? What's in your rational self-interest? What's in the rational self-interest of, society, if you want to go that far, and what isn't? And then maybe we could have a really good conversation about the things that people are calling toxic masculinity, or even now toxic femininity. Though we're not allowed to talk about that, though. We're not allowed to say that women or girls do anything wrong. And I have 3 daughters, so I'll be the first one to say.
The only thing that I know that fits into the realm of toxic femininity is to objectively claim you're a woman and have no fluidity in it. I think that's really the only version that I can think of.
Yeah, exactly. If you say, like, I'm female 100% and I don't, I'm good with that. I'm fine with that. Or for women, when I was a stay-at-home mom, the amount of flack I took most of my friends had to be people I had otherwise nothing in common with, in the sense that, I grew up in New York City. I went to, progressive private school. I, went to a very progressive college and grad school, and had almost no friends because I didn't have anything in common with them. I knew I wanted to be a mom. I wanted to be a wife, like, there's things I wanted to do. And they were like, I'm going to have a career, And then when I decided to stay home and homeschool my kids, it was like, what are you doing? You're a traitor. It's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm living the life that I want to live. That should be a valid choice too. No, it's not. So most of the people I became friends with were people who had a very different background. They grew up in rural America, or they grew up in a suburb, and they thought, they didn't go to graduate school. Some of them didn't go to college because they never got that message. They never got the memo that you're not supposed to want to do this. This isn't okay. And to me, that was kind of a toxic thing. That was toxic behavior, telling other people what they should want and shouldn't want, what's a valid choice and not a valid choice, and how you're a traitor to them. It's like, how I would ask people, how is my choice affecting you? Like, how does this in any way impact your life? It doesn't. It's,
it ruins their narrative. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, but it's like, I'm so sorry, but it reminds me of people who would be threatened, like you were talking about, the kind of religious people who don't have like a deep faith in themselves that like, this is mine and you can't touch it. Like, you can go be an atheist around me and it's not going to affect me one bit, right? And then you have the people who are, like, damn you, that you don't believe the same things. That's a weak faith person, in my opinion. Yeah, that's somebody who does it like, you don't really believe this as much as you say you do, or you wouldn't be doing this. And I see that a lot with this gender stuff. It's that it insists upon itself to a degree where you want to say, do you actually believe this? Because I don't think you really believe this. And I don't know, but what I want to come back to the boys, because no one's talking about it, or not no one. A lot of people are talking about it, but it's still too quiet, in my opinion. I think there's a crisis. Like, I really think we are facing a very serious threat in this country, not just from critical race theory, but from this assault specifically on men, specifically targeting boys and men for re-education, feminization, that like, well, should boys cry and all this? And when boys become men, we're not letting boys become men. In fact, we're, I think, interrupting the process and telling them explicitly not to the point where some are becoming women. Now I'm going to get hate mail.
Say if you don't know what it's like to be a father, you always have time. You can always switch gender and become a father overnight.
Mothering is hard enough. So no, thank you.
But yeah, I agree with you. It's becoming difficult. It's just becoming confusing, and that's the worst part. That to me, when you are intentionally confusing young children, that's child abuse. Like, that's not your role as a teacher, as a parent. You need to stop using your children as these trophies of wokeism that you have, and that's unfortunate when you kind of buy into any sort of fantasies your children have just because you want to be woke enough or something like that. But there must be a strong tension maintained between masculinity and femininity. And that's what we're getting rid of. We're just eliminating. I mean, your example right there of, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Well, that's, if a man ever said that there is no way I would ever be a stay-at-home dad, that's toxic masculinity. Like, if they don't want to stay at home, that's a problem. If you do want to stay at home, that's a problem. So that's the flip side of the toxic masculinity, is it doesn't allow women to want to do, I'm not even going to say more feminine, but it doesn't allow women to do what they actually want to do, because now it's looked down upon. And so it really hurts everyone. If you're going to hurt boys, you're going to hurt everyone. 'Cause like I said, you need that strong tension. But, boys are being taught that they can't do, they can't be more rough on the playground or something like that, which is very, very important to a young boy's development, actually, because that's just the way we learn around kids. My best friend growing up in grade school, and I went to Catholic school, was some kid who punched me in the face in second grade during recess. And it was just because, we both were both in the principal's office, and they're like, oh, you want to give him what was called a pink slip and then get suspended for doing something like that. I'm like, oh no, it was just, whatever. I was probably saying something stupid anyways. And because, I kind of stood up for him, even though he wronged me, that is how we became friends. And that is kind of how we grew and bonded as men. And or as boys at the time. And, it's just a different way to bond. And when you take that away and you try to fit everyone in the exact same box, you're not standing up for diversity, which is the ironic thing, because the diversity that you should want is the ability to grow in your own way. And again, the diversity of thought and your parents being able to bring you up in their specific way, even though it doesn't fit the woke narrative. And that's the biggest problem.
But what I don't get is, I understand, at least intellectually, definitely emotionally, I don't get it, but I understand why activist groups or people are trying to stay relevant in their little niche would go after boys and men, and would be pushing that if you're a feminist and you decided that being a feminist was a big part of your identity, feminism being kind of like advocating for women's causes, and you came to the realization that we're done. Like it's like with women are CEOs, but it's like things that their women aren't present in, or probably because they don't want to be. We've kind of reached that point right now. That's where I was as a feminist. Like first wave took care of it. Thanks. I can get a credit card. I can become a CEO if I want to. Don't want to, but thank you anyway. We got subsequent waves that were kind of like no, until I can literally replace men. We're not done yet, and I see that with a lot of like activists. I get why they do it. It's just perpetuate my own feeling of meaning, which again goes back to the philosophy thing. But I don't get why government, I mean, I do and I don't. I don't understand, other than finding some new way to have, power, why government would be jumping in on this politically. And because even within government, it doesn't really serve their interests completely. There's still a lot of men in government, okay, and it's the military is male dominated. There's things, so it seems really twisted when I start seeing things like how like the White House's new gender policy council, for example, they have a gender policy council at all. The fact that they have this and it's excluding boys and men, it's exclusively for about women. Like, help me understand that. I'm like at a complete loss to understand this.
Yeah, it's a lot of this new type of oppression narratives have become the strongest type of social capital available. So when you talk about being able to kind of monetize your social position, that's really all of what politics is. Money can only take you so far. So to get voted in, you need to monetize your social position and that oppression narrative. And that's the reason you see this I would say third or fourth wave feminism now linking arms with the CRT types. I mean, they kind of have the same means to meet their end goals, and that is to get rid of disparities. Which disparities? I forgot who wrote this. It was in the Claremont Review. But they wrote about, a Thomas Sowell book. And the biggest problem you see there is the idea that disparities are held guilty until proven innocent is a bad way to look at disparities, because disparities occur no matter what, especially when you have two very, very diverse groups being compared to each other. When you just say that, there's more men here than there are women, that must mean there's some sort of misogyny going on. That's a very, very poor analysis of the situation.
Well, this is Truman's Return to Reason says, sure, it does. Weak men don't overthrow their governments. I'm embarrassed that I didn't think of that. I guess yeah.
I mean, when you talk about, demasculating the military, I mean, you saw, we're making, what is it? Suits, flying suits for pregnant women or something like that, as, China's over there training their guys to be as brutal as possible. And it's like, well, we're starting to lose this kind of Cold War that's going on. If we ever turn it into a hot war, well, we're going to have a bunch of nicely dressed half men, half women out there. But when you actually pinned against the real military, it's going to be a massive, massive problem. And they consider, the threat of violence is to be a masculine trait. Okay, sometimes I guess it's kind of masculine to always have violence on the table to solve a problem, because in reality, when people say violence doesn't solve anything, well, it kind of does solve some stuff.
It solved Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's a whole lot of violence it took to get rid of that.
Yeah, right.
But it's not useless.
Exactly. But the problem is, it's like getting rid of guns. It's like, well, there's always going to be someone with a gun out there. And if it's going to be exclusively bad people, that's a problem. It's like you need to be able to defend yourself against other violent people, other people who will use this toxic behavior against you. And you need to be prepared for it. And just getting rid of masculinity as a whole, again, that is a consequence of a consequence that's going to be detrimental for America as a whole.
Well, and it's detrimental on the individual level. And of course, that's where I spend most of my time with my channel, of course, is with education and with children and thinking about things like that. And in this article, Erica does a great job. This is Erica Sanzi, by the way. Sanzi says she covers education. For those of you out there who don't follow her, I highly recommend that you do. And she's also now the outreach coordinator for, I think it's like parents Parents Defending Schools or something. I'm drawing a blank on the organization, but she's working with an organization I profiled in a video today. And it's important that we follow that. But I wanted to show a couple of the statistics. So this is something, I don't know if our audience is aware of this, but it's really, I think it's important. For every 100 girls or women, there are this many boys or men. So, when we talk about disparities, and we got to everything has to be equal. It doesn't appear that people want there to be equal representation of men in a variety of areas. And then there are other things where I don't think they really want equal representation of women. Okay. So you've got this right up here who take AP honors courses in art and music. There's only 54. Okay. Nobody seems to be concerned about that. Who earn a doctor's degree. For every 100 girls, there are only 85 men now. So I'm not saying we should have parity. I'm just saying this notion that women are still, this oppressed minority, it's just not factually accurate. And then when we go down to the negative things, whose entry into kindergarten is delayed. There are 139 boys compared to 100 women. Let's scroll down to some of the less, savory things. Who commit suicide between the ages of 15 and 19? 293 boys and young men, compared to 100 young women. Ages 20 to 29 who die of homicide, 648. And of course, who've been wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq, 5,026. Do we really want equity in these numbers? I don't think so.
When people bring up disparities, especially in pay, they always jump to CEO and never to a garbage collector.
No.
It always goes in one direction. And I think they would accept equity if they, were balanced at the top, but not at the bottom. So there's definitely a different motivations there that we need to suss out. And especially people who, again, when you try to break this chain of kind of woke or modern day feminist thinking, it's just recognizing, the motives behind everything is the first step. And to understand that, these people are not looking for this perfect equity, which has never occurred anywhere on the planet. They're just looking to either gain an extra buck or become more popular. Or, they're fulfilling their own goals, not the goals of the people they claim to.
Yeah, and this is really, boys and men are not doing well, and this is tragic. Diagnosed with communication disorders, 168. Classified as having mental retardation, 140. How many of them do you bet aren't? Boys are treated very poorly in our schools right now, and that's something that I want to talk about. And then, of course, there's life expectancy. Average life expectancy. Males in light blue and the females in dark blue. North America, Canada, and then USA specific. 76 and 81.
Yeah. And not only are those reasons caused by, different social factors, whether, you take a more dangerous job, but there are biological factors, these things too. And to kind of reject that difference, which is kind of what I would call fourth wave feminism, because feminism and the idea of kind of transgender activism, these two can't exist in the same universe, not come into conflict, which is why I would argue there's a fourth wave of feminism that kind of has adopted it. And fourth wave of feminism wants to kill feminism effectively, but to dismiss the biological differences between the two sexes is silly. And I think this actually depicts that, because I think there's, certainly different diseases and stuff like that men can get that women don't, that can cause these types of disparities as well.
Right. And I mean, I guess when this comes into the schools and, boys are treated like defective girls, which is what I'm seeing. And we don't respect the real biological differences. I saw it when I was a young teacher, when I was in student teaching. If you put a pile of wooden blocks out in the middle of the classroom, I've done this. I mean, you just put the blocks out there and you invite all the kids to come and play with them. First thing you notice is the boys jump right in. I mean, they're just right in there. And we're talking about 6-year-olds. So people might say, well, they've been socialized. Maybe they have, but it's pretty young. Okay. They're diving in. The boys are building towers. They're, almost universally, they're building things. They're building towers, whatever. There would be some girls who would, but quietly, they were talking the whole time. Girls also were facing each other, talking, facing each other, facing each other. The boys are like this when they talk. You'll see it even if you go into a bar. Two guys are sitting at a bar and they're like facing forward but talking to each other. They don't look at each other.
They're watching the TV.
They're watching the TV like it's almost universal. I'm not saying it's always, but it's pretty common. The females, they're like this, with more open body language. We behave differently. Nobody sat and taught us to do this. There are things that we just do differently. For the most part, by and large, on average. Again, I know there are people who are different, and I'm not suggesting we treat people, with disrespect if they don't fall into these norms. But we are treating people disrespectfully who do fall into these norms, who do behave along this sort of gender normative ways. The answer to, gender norms is not to trash the gender norms so we can accept people who don't fit into them. And I think that's what you were talking about when we first started this whole conversation is, hey guys, can we have a conversation about inclusion and inclusivity and be treating people with decency and respect who, are different without trashing the people who aren't different? Can we do that? Do we have to talk about boys who are a little less masculine or girls who are a little bit masculine or whatever, as if the people who aren't that way are bad people?
Yeah, I think it's stupid from the beginning and I feel the same way where I have to explain boys do this when they play with blocks, girl do this so you play with blocks, but that doesn't mean that it's every girl.
Yeah,
does
why
that,
do I have to
why
that?
Like, we all know, and that's the weird thing about the wokeism is it puts a veil over the people's eyes that you can tell they know what you're saying. They just know something went off in their head. It's like, oh, I can attack them on this, and it's like I need to be dishonest because that is what my side demands I do. And right. That's the hardest part about having this conversation is like, all right, we're going to speak in generalities here. Like the behavior is fluid does not mean that gender is fluid. Does not mean that sex is fluid. You're talking about behavior, and we're conflating these words together. And it not only is it harmful, but the reason it's harmful is we can't talk to each other anymore. Correct. That's the reason it's harmful.
Right. And we need to have these conversations because that is how you move forward. Like if you really want to make progress, I think you just talk to people. Just be human, talk to people. Somebody wrote to me today in a comment on one of my videos and said, back when they first got out of school, they moved to the city. They didn't live in the city. They lived in like a small town or suburb, moved to a city, got a job in retail, and suddenly met a lot of people who are in minority groups. This was a white kid writing to me and saying, I made friends, I had Black friends, Hispanic friends all over, the place. And it was really great. And I made such great friends. I never would have met these people where I lived. And he said, then he kind of went back home for all, and all the woke stuff happened and went back to a different city. And suddenly he was like, I don't have any friends who don't look just like me anymore. I'm afraid to talk to people. I'm afraid I'll say the wrong thing. I'll offend somebody. I'll step on someone's toes. They'll cancel me. I'll get fired. So he just keeps to himself. And he said it feels so different than just, a few years ago where he was just like, hey, how's it going? Whatever. And that to me is the big tragedy of all of this. Same with boys and men and women and girls. I wonder what it's like to date out there. It's got to be an utter nightmare. I can't imagine. I really can't imagine. I don't want to imagine it. I don't ever have to do it again.
Yeah, that's why things like Tinder is out there. That's why Netflix and chill's a thing, because you can just watch Netflix and not have to worry about communicating, because you don't have to worry about stepping on each other's toes at that point. And there's a lot of kind of human diffusing mechanisms out there that kind of treat us as not being human beings anymore. We can talk to each other and communicate, and that we kind of have to be these monolithic actors who can't define ourselves as men or women, but yet we still see it out there where most women are still attracted to masculine men and vice versa. Right. So, we see it via observation, but the problem is we're told that we can't trust our lying eyes because that would be bigoted of us. That's not stepping in line with the woke religion that we must believe in.
Yeah. And I worry. I really worry when it comes to this issue specifically about the boys. I think we're going to have a really hard time building a functioning society in the future if we don't welcome and encourage all expressions of your, of your gender or whatever. If in order to include those who do not fit the norm, we have to, rain hellfire on those who do. I think we're in big, big trouble when the power goes out. That's like in Ayn Rand, right? In Atlas Shrugged, at the very end, the power just goes out in the city. Yeah. If people don't acknowledge the fact that there are industries, there are jobs women don't want to do. They don't want to do them, or they're by and large physically incapable of doing them, right? If we don't wake up and recognize that and start getting grateful in a big hurry that we are different. I mean, that people are different and you're born that way, and that's okay. And I think we're in big trouble. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, I can give an example of, I went to an engineering school. Engineering politics comes from, I'm actually an engineer. And I went to just an explicitly engineering school, and they have a nursing school in there. And the only reason they brought that in is because the ratio to guys to girls was like 18-1. But that's a big call out to engineering, that they don't have enough women in there. And what they did to try to get more women in was go to high school and try to show all these women that you can do this. And this is a very, very healthy thing to do. Like, I like this part of it, is to say, hey, maybe you're interested in it, but you're just turned off socially because you don't think you ought to be doing this. So I think it's really good to go to women and say, hey, this is not seen as a traditional womanly role, but if you're interested in something like this, pursue that. The problem comes when you look down on the girl who decides, no, I'd rather go into nursing. And you're like, why wouldn't go to engineering? We're giving it to you for free. Do this thing, or we're going to look down on you. That is where the problem comes in, because now you're hurting those women. And, even attacking masculinity is going to have horrible, horrible effects on women as well. And so I think it certainly hits boys at younger ages. It gets so confusing. And then when women grow up and try to do their own things and pursue their own interests, then they're told that they shouldn't be doing that as well.
I think I remember before I ever had kids, and it's probably because I had a pretty crappy childhood and I had a terrible time in public school. And so a lot of, people go different ways. With some people, when they have that, they get bitter and they project onto others and it becomes a nightmare. Okay. I turned it the other way. I said, I want to be a teacher so I can be the teacher I wish I had. I want to be a mom so I can be the mom I wish I had, and I was very explicit in my own mind, thinking about it. Don't ask me why I was like this. I just was. Or I said to myself when I was pretty young, probably in my teens, I'm just going to see who my kids are. It kind of came out like that in my head. Like I felt like I was me from a very young age. I just remember feeling like I'm just me,
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that bothered me was I didn't feel like my mother liked who I was, just being me, and then other people I met kind of like that too. And I just wanted to be myself. So I said, I'm going to figure out who my kids are. I'm going to let them tell me. I'm going to support what I'm seeing. So I get the parents, if they are being honest, the parents just say, well, my child is just expressing him or herself in this way, and I want to be supportive. I get that. But there's a difference between supportive and now I'm going to interrupt your biological development. Okay. So I would never, I'll admit freely, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't do that. If any of my children.
There's a difference between supportive and parenting.
Yeah.
Is what I would say.
And
people
exactly.
try to be best friends and they don't want to be parents.
No. And so what I meant in my head by supportive was, I'm not going to project my hopes and dreams for their career and their, like what sports they're going to play and all this kind of junk. It's just like my kids, I was an athlete. My kids, none of them wanted to play sports. And my approach was, okay, that's one of the things I guess I won't be doing with my kids that I thought I'd be doing, but I'm not going to press the point, because nothing was more miserable than having somebody push you to do something you don't want to do, that you're not naturally inclined to do. And I didn't want my kids to be miserable. But I have had the opposite, where I've had, one of my kids say, well, I want to do this thing. And like you said, I'm supportive of their idea, but then I go back and say, okay, well, how's that going to fit in to the other values that you have or the other things that you want to do, and so forth, and support like that. But I see a lot of parents today who think support is, like you said, I'm going to be your best friend. I'm going to validate your every thought and feeling, even if it doesn't support your rational self-interest. I'm going to broadcast out to the world what a great person I am because I'm doing that. And of course, only if it fits a currently popular narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they call support now.
Yeah.
You know, I just,
you always feel, I mean, it's hard not to, baby your children. Now, I kind of grew up with a different experience. My parents were very, very strict growing up, and I've grown a lot because of that. I think it was really good. But, someone like my daughter will come up to me, and her biggest complaint at school is like, people think I'm weird. Like I'm a weirdo. Like I'm just weird. And to me, my first question is, what do they consider being weird? Because it's okay to be weird. Because my follow up to that normally is like, I'm a weird person and I like being weird because it makes you interesting. Like being normal is dumb and it makes you boring. Like you'll figure this out in high school when you really start to develop social cliques. Is the popular people are normally the saddest people because they're like, I need to fit in this box constantly. And I'm trying to project myself as this popular person because of whatever is popular at the time. It's the weirdos that actually have the most fun because you can kind of be yourself. But I also make it a point to her, I'm like, what do they consider weird? Like if you're picking your nose at lunchtime, that's something you should stop doing because you need to fit in socially. Fitting in socially is still a very important thing. We're social creatures. We have to figure out a way to develop our social skills. And that's something I had to learn, for a while, because I didn't have great social skills when I was younger. And I had to develop it through time. And, it's this fine line of really having empathy for your child and what they're experiencing and still parenting. Right.
yeah.
Because I always tell this to my fiance, and I know this is not a rule, so don't get mad at me. But to me, and this is kind of how my mom, stated it, is like, if you ever consider your parent your best friend, you're doing it wrong, because you need to be an authority figure. That is super important. Now, when you grow up and you're in your 20s and you're moved out, yeah, your parent can become your best friend and someone you really want to rely on, but they still have to be a parent. That's important. And not enough people want to parent. And now we're making people scared to be parents because their kids can get taken away from them if they do so.
Oh yeah. Don't I know it? And then of course, if you're in a divorce situation, it's even more dicey. Which, I know when it comes to the stuff like the critical race theory stuff, that's being used, that and the pandemic restrictions have both been used in split families against parents. There have been cases of parents who've had their kids taken away from them, or they've lost their custody because they have opposed the critical race theory teachings in the school. And there are parents who, didn't have a mask on, dropping their child off at school. The kid had the mask on. The kid went into the building with the mask on, but the parent on the sidewalk didn't. And they leveraged that. So there's an assault on parental rights too going on that is pushing the narrative. And I just made a video today about a school district in Missouri where the ELA coordinator was sending an email out to all of the principals in charge of ELA at the various schools, telling them what to hide from the parents in Canvas. So, you're not even really completely allowed to be a parent. There's like a very specific way that it's okay to be a parent. And if these days, if you're a parent who says to your son, for example, like, way to go, son, you're a boy and you're doing boy things and that's awesome. Congratulations. It's like you're failing in the world of today. You're supposed to be counseling your son to, be more sensitive and do all these things, whatever, and tell your daughter that she's, go do boy things. And why can't you just let your kids be themselves? Why do the schools have to get in the middle of that and say, so tell us what your gender identity is? Check it off on a box. These are like grooming behaviors. I want to make sure people watching know that, by the way, and in all my videos, I want to make sure they understand that no teacher has a right, the Supreme Court has ruled on this, to ask your child personal questions about their gender or sexual orientation. Period. Full stop. Any teacher does that in a class, they are already violating the law. So they're not allowed to do that.
Yeah. I think this is a result of us relying so heavily on government, and since public school is just an extended arm of the government, they assume the role of parents, and you're kind of secondary parents. And I can understand, looking at some people, you're friends with someone in high school. It's like, I'm good friends with you, but you're too stupid to raise kids. And then they have kids, and it's like, all right, well, but, even if you think someone's not prepared to be a parent, no one loves their kid more than their parents. As a general rule, of course, there's psychopaths out there, but no one loves their kids as much as their parents. No one's looking out for the kids as much as their parents do. And I think some of the schools and their teachers believe that they're like, you know what, we're really the ones looking out for them. You just don't know. You don't know what you're doing. So we're going to look out for them instead of you. And that's always a recipe for disaster, because no kids are the same. And obviously, like I said, the parents are the ones who really inherently biologically care about these kids.
Well, and increasingly we have people in very high positions in education in America who are childless. And I think, it's an unpopular opinion, but I think that needs looking into, because it's a logical fallacy to say that somebody who doesn't have children that can't learn about children or how children learn. I'm not saying that, but I am saying it is interesting that there are so many in positions of power over deciding what education should encompass, including the values instruction piece, including the telling parents what they don't need to see and things like that, when they don't have children themselves. I think that gives me pause, because to your point, it is a job. It really is, that you just don't understand until you've done it. It doesn't have to be your biological child. It could be a foster child, could be an adopted child, could be a niece or nephew that you're caring for. It doesn't matter. Until you've been legally and physically responsible for a child 24 hours a day for longer than a week, it's hypothetical at best. And for them to say, parents don't need this and parents need, don't need to know that, or, they just want X, or, don't listen to them. They don't know. They're not the experts. I think coming from people who don't have children is even more inappropriate. They have literally no frame of reference. And I'm seeing that a lot. So whether it's because you have a very young cadre of brand new teachers who haven't had time to have kids, they're young people, or you have people like Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the NEA, who has no children of her own.
Yeah. I get what you mean by not wanting to pose that fallacy of kind of argument from authority that you must have this experience in order to comment on something like that. But
you can comment,
if there is a caveat to that falsity, it is probably the kids, because there is no experience in the world like having kids. That is unique. There's nothing even close to it. I've always listened to people, and it's always considered some sort of like feminist thing. Like I know a bunch of normally younger women they hate it when people say, if you don't want to have kids today, you're going to grow up super depressed, because eventually you're going to want to have kids. And they're like, how dare you assume, my interests when I grow older. And what I do think is kind of looked at as a more masculine behavior is like, I don't care if I have kids. It's actually the same mechanism for men. Most men are going to be, if you grow up without kids, you probably will fall into a bit of a depression, because you're like, what I could have had. Because you don't have that experience anymore. But I like to go, I believe it's Dennis Prager who said this, is when explaining to people like why you ought to have kids. He explains like your level of happiness as a single person is on a scale of 0 to 10. Okay. But when you go in a relationship, when you're just in a relationship with another woman, that scale goes from -5 to 15. When you have a kid, that scale goes from like +15 to -50. Like, you will never have the happiness that you would have single as you would if you had a kid, but also the lows are as low as you can possibly go, because it's devastating when bad things happen to your children. But it's a risk assessment you have to take.
Exactly.
And that's what people need to understand. It's like, if you don't want to have kids, okay, you don't like taking risks, you just want to stick with what you got, you're going to eventually look at it one day as like, I could have had that, but I decided to go past it. But that risk assumes some of these things to take care of your children. And I think that disincentive to make sure you're not going to fall into that Great Depression is also there to make sure you keep your kids healthy and develop them into proper adults, because that'll only benefit you and will benefit, the community around you.
Well, that's the thing, is we do that a lot. And I can't speak for other countries, but at least in this country, we tend to make policy or promote ideas that act like the minority is the majority, and we ignore real majorities. And this is a case in point. Yes, there are some terrible parents out there, like truly abusive, horrible, monstrous parents, but they're not the majority. They're really not. And you would know if they were. I mean, you just would know. And we we treat all parents, I feel like we're all just one moment away from abusing the heck out of our kids, or, keeping them locked up in the closet, ignorant and stupid and racist and all this, and it's horrible. I mean, it's causing so many problems. So the school is reaching farther and farther into the home and taking on more and more parenting responsibility. Now, teaching kids not just about the basics of sex ed, okay, but going into the kindergarten and being like, so let's talk about whether you really are a girl. We have a 6-year-old coming home going, today I found out I might not really be a girl. I mean, there are parents who are reporting that that's happening and they have no recourse. It's too late. It's happened. You cannot close that door again. Now, what do you say to your 6-year-old? What are you going to do? Say, your teacher's an idiot? That's going to go well. Unless you plan to pull your kid out that day, they got to go back into that classroom. What conversation are you having with your 6-year-old now that can fix that? And it's one of the things I say on my channel is like, be very careful when you decide you want to send them back into the schools now that we know all this stuff, because certain ideas, once out there, once your child has heard it, can't pull it back. You can't. Now you've got a job on your hands. You are against the school. You're against the teacher. They're creating adversarial relationships between us and our kids about issues that we shouldn't even be forced to talk about if we don't want to talk about them, especially at that time. Whether it's because of an age, maybe I wasn't planning to discuss sex-related issues with my kids until they asked me at 10 or 11. Why are you making me talk about it at 6 and 7? They're imposing upon families. They're causing rifts in families. And this is where I really think it's a lot more like the sort of like the Maoist Cultural Revolution than people want to be honest about. They're like, no, that couldn't possibly happen here. It is happening here. We're seeing it. So, and this is one of them. And telling boys that they're, they need to not be the way they are. I can't imagine the conversations that go on in the homes of parents with sons. What must that be like? I have girls. I have no idea. I have no idea what it must be like to deal with that.
I can tell you what it's like. It's a lot of you yelling, "Hey kid, stop playing with your dinghy." And it's a bit different, but yeah, it's different. I have a girl and a boy, so I get to see how they react. My daughter is more willing to come up to me and ask me my opinion on something, and my son is just going to do the thing until he comes back bleeding from something. Typically is the order of operations there, but it's really being proactive. If any parents are listening right now, it is, you need to involve yourselves in your kids' lives, because you brought up something like sex ed, which shouldn't be something the school takes care of at all. But the reason why, and this is what we need to be honest with ourselves, the reason why the school takes care of it is because a lot of parents push it off on some third party to explain very, very uncomfortable things to their children. And sex ed, I think, is one of them. It is really uncomfortable as a parent to talk about sex with your kids. And my kids are young, so I haven't had to talk about it, with them at all. But when us as parents are not willing to have that conversation, and it's like, all right, school, you take care of this part of parenting for me, this is what you get. So, especially if there's parents listening now, it's like you have to be proactive with these conversations with your kids, because you don't, as uncomfortable as it is for you, imagine being your kid having to have this conversation with someone they barely know, an adult that they're kind of estranged with. So it's not a fun conversation no matter what, but it is your advantage as a parent and their advantage as a kid to learn this stuff from their parents. Because there are some things, like the CRT type people, there's one thing that I think they bring up at the beginning for kids that it's important to help with your children. It's like, kids are going to see kids who don't look like them, and they believe it's part of the school's responsibility to explain why that is, when it's not the school's responsibility. Is you as a parent. And this is something they say is just a reality. And I'm like, I agree with you here. The kids are going to see kids of other races because they have eyes, as long as they can see. And it's your responsibility as a parent to be proactive and say, hey, these kids might look differently. It doesn't mean that they're different than you. You treat them the same. You treat them as friends, and that's important before the school gets in there and say, yeah, you treat them the same, although they're not the same. And if you're white, you need to kind of hate yourself.
Well, and that's the thing, is that I did speak to my kids the first time they went into any kind of a program. I mean, I was homeschooling, but when I was pregnant with my second child, and I was moving into a new house, I decided, you know what, my daughter needs to be, have some friends to play with. So I put her into preschool. like a little, half day kind of, they call it Mother's Day out here in the South. But I put her into that. And because she'd mostly been at home, and just, we went to the park and we did things like that. But I realized pretty quickly, like, she hasn't really seen a lot of diversity, in terms of like ethnic diversity, racial diversity. So I told her the same thing. I said, this is going to be great. You're going to go play with other kids. And some of the kids might be very different from you, might look different from you, et cetera. But they're just kids just like you. And that's where I left it. And sure enough, she made friends and didn't, treated everybody the same way. And then when she would refer to a friend, she'd say, "Oh, there's my friend." And I'd be like, "Where, which kid?" Right. She's like, "The brown one." That's like how she put it. Like the brown, that's my friend. So-and-so is the brown one. But it was just like, that's my friend, and what they're telling us now is, no, now we're supposed to tell our kid, like, you're an oppressor and you have privilege. And that little girl, she doesn't have privilege because her color is different than you. That strikes me as literal racism. I don't know that. That little girl's dad could be a doctor. Like, I don't know. I have no idea who, just because of the color of someone's skin, how dare I judge what they have or don't have, or think or don't think? I mean, it strikes me as overt racism, some of the things that I'm hearing now. And just like I think it's overt sexism to say, well, boys are this, boys are more violent, and boys are more, bad, basically. Just like it would be sexist to say, well, men are really much better at XYZ. Like, there are some things where
men are better at peeing their names in the snow. So there's a couple of things there, but
right.
But it is, what I would say is, it's dangerous to say, because I do think it's fair to say men are more violent, or the most violent people are men, but that does not mean that you are predestined to be a violent person because you're a boy. No. That's the important message there. And they're saying
that's how it gets twisted.
Right.
They twist it like exactly. Like, history is full of, in the United States, that most of the people who acted on racism were white, but they've twisted that to be white people are racist. And unless we interrupt that, unless we do something, you will be that. They do the same with boys. Men statistically engage in more acts of violence. Ergo, we have to do something. We have to feminize you, or you're going to be a violent person. No, it doesn't work like that.
There's a delicate balance between sex and race, because sex actually does kind of leave you kind of like predetermined to be open to like violence or something like that. You're more likely to have a violent interaction if you're a man interacting with another man. But race is like different. That doesn't predetermine really anything. And so I hear a lot of conservatives who fall into this is say, is like, well, if you like your electricity, thank white people because a white person invented it. It's like, well, no, the way you present that is a person who happens to be white did this thing. And it's stupid when we attribute, these things to whole races, when it's like, no, an individual who happened to be this thing did something. And that's the way you should present it, because there is no causative factor there.
Right. I want to get to this super chat. Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Wow, this is mind-blowing. As a father of an almost 2-year-old girl, I'm nervous for what the public education system is going to be like when she turns 5. And you're right to be nervous. And it's great that you're thinking about this now when she's 2. And I agree with Return to Reason with Truman that you might want to consider, since you have time now, consider your options. You have options. I do have a locals community, and we talk about those options on, my Zoom calls, or even within the community. I have a homeschool resource list. It might seem out of reach for you, but I'm here to tell you it's not. You can do it. I know single parents do it, people who have to work. I mean, you don't have to use their schools, but if you feel like you do, get on board with school choice. At a minimum, do that, right? But thank you so much.
And it looks like, Brian, you followed up saying, I imagine you mean you're not in a position to do that. So I have an 8-year-old daughter. So, I've kind of gone through some of the steps that you may have to go through, and she's gone through public school, up until now. And again, like we were saying before, it's about being a proactive parent. Like, you are a teacher as well. You are the main teacher in your daughter's life, and you need to act that way. So that means she comes home from school, ask her what she's doing, ask her what she's talking about with her teachers. And if it's damaging to her, you can have that, email the school, email the teacher, have that conversation with that person. But in the end, you're going to be looked at as the authority figure to her, and it's whatever you say that's going to go in her mind. So you need to be proactive if you don't have another choice there.
And getting back to like what we started in the very beginning with, people don't really want freedom and things like that. this is one where I get really defensive of parents. Because I've been both. I've been a teacher and a parent, both simultaneously. And I do feel for parents, because I do feel like the system, first of all, was forced. It's compulsory. They take the money from you. You've ordered your life around the existence of public schools. It is not fair for them to say now, well, it's the parents. Like, no, you guys, I don't have a choice. You're going to take the money no matter what. I don't have it left over to go choose a different school. You fight school choice every chance you get. You fight it hard with lots of money, union money, etc. So I'm kind of stuck. And so don't dog on parents, because after all your gatekeeping and all your pressure and all your negativity about anything the parents say, they are bowing out. Most people would. Over time, most parents would just be like, I don't have time for this. It's a second full-time job for me to bang on the door of the schoolhouse and say, let me in, let me see what's going on. And they hope and they pray and they they ask their kids at the end of the day, what's going on? They try to talk to friends, what's happening. But it is, you don't get paid to do that. They do. And so what I'm trying to offer to parents, like with this channel and even with the locals, is maybe some guidelines, maybe some toolkits, like you need at the very beginning. Like, Brian, before you enroll your child in any public school, you want to get in there and know the process for getting access to the curriculum materials, the learning materials. What's the request process? How long does it take? Do it day one. Every single year. I'm soliciting that material. What is it, in writing 10 days in advance? Okay, here you go. I want it the syllabus. I want to see the books. I want to see what my child's going to be learning. By the way, I'm going to want to visit the classroom once a month. What's the process for that? Just assert yourself, because they're not going to invite you. They don't want you there. They're going to push you off with both hands and tell you they're the experts and they know what's what. So your only way, and this is to any parent, if all parents did this, if all parents suddenly were like sending these letters, requesting the information, visiting the school, all this stuff, suddenly they go, oh crap, like we're not going to get away with it anymore. Don't let them take your freedoms so quickly. Just because they make it hard doesn't mean it's impossible. You can request this information. You can get in there. So if you are in a position where you must use the schools, it's not an option, then that's what you have to do. That's, because not all kids are going to talk. Not all kids are going to talk.
Yeah. They can only take what you give them, much like the freedom. They are in a public position if you're using a public school, and it's completely up to you to determine how you want that education to go within a certain bound, within certain reasons, obviously. But yeah, it's all about being proactive. And, much like Deb said, even for me, attending a PTO meeting was very enlightening to me. And I wrote about that experience in locals, but, it was the first step in me understanding, what they're thinking, kind of what their motives are. And, you gotta be, it's all being proactive and really investing in your kids' education.
Yeah, they don't want your input, tragically. And they say they do. I mean, they give lip service to that. They're like, well, it starts in the home, and parents did this more and parents do that more. And then parents try to do that and they get pushback, or they get emails behind their back about don't show the parents, don't tell the parents. The fact of the matter is you have rights, and they can't, they have custody of your children. So you need to know what's going on. I just want to quickly thank Alexandra. Thank you so much. You're welcome. We love having these conversations. And as I said at the beginning, anybody who has anything to add to these conversations or topics that you'd like us to discuss, please let us know. So I know that Truman at Return to Reason says, forget about it. Reform, no, not going to happen. I agree with him. Full disclosure, I don't think the schools can be reformed. I think the best we could do is make the best of it. But what do you think? You have kids. You're using the schools. I think you have to, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your take?
We're looking to move now, but to give more background on Truman, he's in education. So he's someone who's working from the inside, who understands these things more than I do. And I would say you and Truman are much more knowledgeable on the subject than me. I'm just a parent. I'm just experiencing this as a lot of people in the chat are. So, my hopes are still up that they can still get some sort of meaningful education without too much propaganda in some sort of public school. But I've learned from having those PTO meetings and then the follow-ups after, which has basically been non-existent because, like I said, I've written on Locals kind of a transcript of what I said during the PTO meeting, but I kind of showed that my knowledge on CRT is what we were talking about at the time, that I'm more knowledgeable than they are on their own subject. And then they just kind of ignore me because I'm not loud enough as me as one person. And even though I have a few other parents who are similar to me who just didn't know how to articulate themselves, we're not a large enough minority to get their attention. So they just have the ability to ignore us because, again, it's a public institution. They don't have to worry about being effective or efficient. So our decision we made as a family is we plan on moving back to where we both grew up, which is a much more conservative area. And our greatest attempt is going to be bringing our son and daughter into a Catholic school, which is where I went, which is going to be a little bit better. Although, I mean, really all forms of education are getting a bit of this indoctrination. I know you've talked about it before, Deb, with the money incentives they have for doing this by putting this stuff into the curriculum. So it's unfortunate. So I don't know how I'm going to change the system or have people, push the curriculum to change to something that's more, has more utility, that focuses on developing the child to give them the necessary skills to be a fully functioning adult, which is a no-brainer. That should be, you as an educator, your first priority. Unfortunately, it's not. And it's getting them to understand, it's like, hey, you're floating away from this priority and you're trying to build this weird utopia where you have a bunch of these activists, because you're just pumping out activists. The problem is, when you pump out activists, they assume that they're telling the truth. They assume they know everything and they're just going to argue to their point. And that's not developing fully functioning kids. And that's going to damage them in the future. And if we have a future of just activists, I mean, we kind of are seeing what happens already now. So trying to just open the eyes of some educators and get some traction going. I don't know if it's possible, but, do what you can. Don't stop fighting just because you don't think it's possible. But there are other options. And I like, Deb, what the stuff you go through for, figuring out those alternatives.
Yeah. So Dominic says parents used to have to worry about their kids going outside and hurting themselves. Now they have to worry about them going to school and hurting their mind. Yes, I have said that repeatedly on my channel. I'm just going to keep banging that drum that child abuse is now occurring inside the classroom. And increasingly it is, it's a kind of abuse that is, it's certainly as bad as physical abuse, I would say, because when they get inside your head, and if they do it repeatedly, so it's like every day across a time period, the kids their own internal defenses wear down, and you as a parent can't get in there. You can't get in there and combat it. It's a lot harder. And it's really traumatizing to be told by adults one way or the other. So if you're a white child and you're told you're an oppressor, or you're a boy, and it's like, just admit it. You're a sexist, you're misogynist, all this is abusive, and it wears them down. It's very difficult to maintain your composure, your internal sense of self-love when you're hearing that, even if it's fed to you with a sweet smile and it's like, it's okay, it's not your fault. And here, let's read about the different ways that people who look just like you and are exactly like you in every way, shape, or form did bad things in the past. They don't have the intellectual or emotional stamina because they're children. Even adults don't, by the way. I mean, Carlin talks about this in a workplace. Team structure breaks down. People are suspicious of each other. If adults can't weather that storm after one training destroys teams. They're just like, they don't trust each other and they're like this. Imagine every day across the years hearing or just reading books and having your teacher say, so let's discuss in what ways white people abuse Black people. These are literally questions that they ask kids after reading stuff. The kids, there's only so much you can do at home. You can't wrap them in bubble wrap, put plugs in their ears. And now you can, when they come home, you can tell them like, none of the stuff they're telling you is true, but then what's the value? Then your kid starts going, so exactly why are you sending me? Now I can speak to this because coming from a split household, my kids knew how I felt. They knew exactly what I thought about all of this. And they knew I was fighting. I'd go into the school and I fought for them. I was in there making enemies. Okay. But they also knew I was dropping them off every day. And they would say that, Mom, why are you doing this? I see you in here. You're complaining. You're saying that you tell us that we're right for feeling upset. We're right to be angry and feel hurt and feel, like we can't speak in class. But why do you make us go? Why are you making us go? And I'm hearing this from a 6th grader. So we're not talking, a high school kid. All right. Why are you making me go? Prior to that, when my daughter was in 3rd grade and getting bullied by somebody and they didn't do anything about it because there was a cultural issue, which translates to the girl abusing her was Black and we don't want to discipline her because, well, she's Black and your daughter's white. And so therefore something she did must have, they didn't say it explicitly, but she must have deserved it. My little tiny daughter and the almost 5'10" girl in 3rd grade. And my daughter was like, why are you making me go, Mom? Why are you doing this to me? Now, I'm lucky. My child asked me. I had to come up with an answer. It wasn't a good one, but I had to come up with it. Some kids won't ask. They won't say. But in their heads, you got to wonder, are they saying, why are you making me do this? And that's what I don't want any parent to have to deal with, because I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that question. And even as glad as you are that they voiced it and weren't just carrying it around silently, it's excruciating. And I didn't have a choice. I was legally obligated. I'll leave it at that. I was legally obligated to bring them. But it was torture.
See, with my best strategy, I don't have an experience. Again, my kids are really young, but I don't have the same experience. But I try to explain it to my daughter, at least in a way of setting it in terms of the viewpoint diversity. So I've told her explicitly, there's some things your school is going to say that I think is wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's okay for other people to have other opinions. I had to have a talk. This talk actually started in a pretty funny way. I listen to podcasts while I'm in the car with her, and she picked up on the name Joe Biden one time, and someone at school, or like someone in a home across the school, had a Joe Biden sign in their yard, and my daughter's like, "Ugh, Joe Biden," and I'm like, "No, like don't." Or she also brought up like, "We hate Joe Biden, right?" I'm like, "No, I don't hate them." It's like, you don't hate people just because they have a different opinion than you. Right. So I'm trying to get that point across. And I try to, this is my best way to kind of help her understand that you might be taught something that we don't believe in or that we don't agree with. And that's okay for other people to believe other things, but come here, you ask me the question, and I'm going to try to give you the answer that I believe in. You can make your decision in the future. But the problem is, when you're dealing with these outright evil ideas, it's really hard to say, it's like, well, yeah, your teacher is teaching how to be a racist, but we just don't believe in that thing. And you need to be, tolerant toward those different ideals. And, that's much, much harder to say. So there really is no good way to disarm that, and really no good way to explain that. But what I can say, Deb, if I think of this as an engineer, I work with a lot of quality management people, and the quality management people are the ones who tell you what the problems are. And they're always hated in every company. Like, you hate the quality manager, and that's a good thing. That's when you have good quality managers, when you hate the guy, because that means he's telling you stuff that you need to know. And sometimes I think of that way as a teacher, as a parent. Like, if you're hated by the school, you're probably a good parent, because you're investing in it. It's better than not being known by the school, right? So sometimes you got to be annoying. Sometimes you got to get in there and, be that person that they see you walking up to the school and like, oh, I don't want to talk to this person. And me personally, I like to be the person who no one wants to talk to, but yeah, sometimes you have to be pestering.
People said, and people still do say, I'm worried about backlash against my child. And I want to encourage parents to turn that around. I think it actually ended up, from the position of the staff. Anyway, I couldn't protect my kid from the other kids. That I couldn't do. But I believe it worked the opposite. I think they knew I was vocal. I was watching. I was looking at everything they do. And even though they didn't really change their behavior in terms of what they were teaching my kid, because they were teaching everybody, they definitely were very careful about how they treated her. I got the feeling they went almost out of their way to make sure they didn't draw any attention where I might sue them or something like that, for backlash. So it's not a guarantee, but I'd say don't think it's a guarantee the other way either. Don't assume that because you're speaking up, they're going to take it out on your kid. They might be actually chastened and say, like, be careful, avoid that one. Like, don't cross that one. Her mom is really loud. We don't want to draw attention through that kid's mom is watching. So it can actually have the opposite impact. And then two, anything you can do to arm your child physically, It's not a half bad idea to teach your child how to defend themselves verbally, physically, if they have to. I mean, it sounds like a crazy thing to say, but it's, they need to feel safe in their own person. Like they have personal power to protect themselves and don't need to rely on the school to do it for them or necessarily on you to do it for them. And whatever that means, little kid taekwondo, just to feel that sense of confidence, talking to them more about themselves as individuals. Like, what are your ideas? What do you think about this? So that they can start to develop that philosophy we talked about in the beginning of the live cast, you're not too young to start thinking about your own thinking. While you can't think rationally the way an older kid can, even a young kid can start to have conversations with their parent about the world. And I think most important thing is to make sure that you make clear to them that it's okay to not know stuff. It's okay to fail. It's okay to not have the answer to everything. And even the adults in your school don't have the answer to everything. So if you hear a grown-up telling you that something is definitely true, that upsets you in any way, like it makes you feel something icky, like makes you feel a negative feeling inside yourself, come home, let's talk about it, because I'm a different grown-up. And I want to help you, learn how to handle those kind of emotions. Don't leave it up to this adult in the school to tell your child what to feel. Least of all about any negative emotions that come up, because one of the components of critical race theory is, oh, that negative feeling you feel, that's your fragility. That's your racism. That's the evidence of it. Okay. That's the most insidious form of abuse there is. So if they can bring that home to you, if they feel something yucky that the teacher said to them, it was like they just don't like what they heard, and you can help them work through that and help them understand it, and you help them build their own personal view of how this world works, you're going to intercept that development. Because as I said at the beginning, the people, even young people, even children who have their own solid philosophy or worldview are more immune to this. They see it for the hypocrisy and garbage that it is. My kids were not even remotely in danger from probably about 5th grade on of being converted to this worldview, because I have been talking to them all along about just what we don't know, what it's okay not to know, what, other grownups who tell you they know the answer. Nope, that's not true, and so forth, so that they don't rely on these people.
Yeah, I think Truman just brought up a good comment where he said there's a reason every successful totalitarian regime had a program for separating children from their parents for indoctrination and facilitation of loyalty to the state. When I talk about the book, Eric Hoffer, there's a common theme he has in there called self-sacrifice. And what he means by self-sacrifice is sacrificing your individuality to the collective. And this is a major strategy for any sort of mass movement, or like Truman says here, totalitarian regime, is when you lose your sense of self in exchange to be part of this new collective that people are trying to indoctrinate you in. So there are a lot of effective strategies like you brought up. I think one of the big ones that I really relate to is the idea of, and I know it sounded weird when it first came out, this idea that sometimes you got to be physical or be prepared to be physical. That doesn't mean you're going out looking for a fight. That's toxic masculinity, by the way. No, it's toxic behavior. But but it is important. Both my kids and I am in jujitsu, and I think it's something I want to say Jordan Peterson talked about, that he brings up a Bible verse saying the meek shall inherit the earth, the meek shall inherit the world. And people say meek is as in a synonym for weak, but it's not. Meek means you have the ability to be physical, or you have a large sword, but you keep it sheathed, I believe it's called. That you have this ability that you choose not to use, but you still have it in case you would ever need it. And it's important for your confidence to do it, not only just self-defense purposes, but it boosts confidence being able to have, the physical element, and even just generally being healthy for your kids. It'll help defend against indoctrination, I think, because it'll help. I mean, it really helps to boost down confidence if you're going to indoctrinate someone. So keeping a confident child will make it extremely difficult to do that, and they'll stand by their principles.
Very true. Those who lose themselves free themselves from the consequences of their ineffective selves. I think that was the quote. But it's true. You won't really know yourself for many, many, many years, but it's it's not too early, like I said, to walk your kids through the process of thinking about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And just, you can even ask them questions. So the teacher said this, and it's like, have you seen that? Have you seen that does that sound like it's true from what you've experienced in your life? And do you believe it? Do you think it's true? And if they say, well, teacher said it, or whatever, say, well, you can even go look it up with a kid. My daughter came home and said, my teacher said Publix is a racist grocery store. Is that true, Mom? And I said, well, first tell me why the teacher said it. What was the background? What's this backstory? Well, they put a store in a neighborhood they said was a rich white neighborhood, and that makes them a racist grocery store. And I said, well, first let's look at whether the neighborhood is rich and white. Okay. And we talked about, even with my young child, I was like, what does rich mean? And she's like, well, I don't know. Does it mean, everybody there has a lot of money? And I said, okay, let's go with that. What does white mean in terms of a neighborhood? So we kind of got some working definitions of words before we started, because they won't do this in school. They just say rich and white, and they expect the kids to just know what that means. And I got her to define it for herself. And then we went online and we looked up the site selection process for Publix. Took all of 5 minutes. And I read it to her in plain English. I said, here's what they do. And then I showed her the map. I circled it. And I said, you know who lives in this neighborhood? It's where you used to go to your lower elementary school, before I switched you to the charter school. And she goes, those aren't all white people. Like, she had eyes in her head. She's like, no. She goes, Mom, my elementary school was like more than half black. I'm like, right? And then she goes, oh, so I kind of helped her at her level work through how it wasn't true. She didn't have to go back into the school and take on the teacher. She didn't have to do that. It was just like, oh. So moving forward from there, she had an appropriate level of skepticism, and then began coming home and go, okay, so today he said this. And we're like, all right, let's go. So not every parent can do this. I mean, I understand. Not every parent has the time. Not every kid is going to be forthright. Not every kid's going to have that first conversation. So you do have to kind of get in there when you can. But I just want to offer up some suggestions, because it can feel really overwhelming and you can feel helpless. Like, what am I going to do? My kid's in the class and I can't solve it. It's like, no, you can't. But you can help your child build their own armor, their own suit of armor, their own thought process, their own philosophy and worldview, and trust in their own eyeballs. If you can teach your child to trust reality and trust their own five senses, you've gone a long way to combating this, because everything they're going to teach in school along this woke stuff does not match reality. There's no reality there. There's no there. You can very easily still, it might not be so easy if Google has its way, but you can still very easily take all of these assertions and, without too much legwork, show your child how, that's just not true.
Yeah. It's giving them tools to prepare them to be adults in the real world. And
correct.
Problem is, if the school's giving them tools at all, it is preparing them for this fake world where they're going to be. I forgot if it was Truman who brought this up, with their LARPing, and they're fighting imaginary dragons, and it's not a real reality, but they're trying to build it for them and build this perception. Yeah. I mean, that's the difference between teaching kids how to learn and creating activists, where activists already know the solution. They know there's racism. They just need to figure out how to assign it. Whereas the thinking person who's like, there might be racism here. Let's see if there is. And if there's empirical data to support it, then there it is. But in most cases, especially in America, there's just no data.
Right. And it's a lot easier to resist peer pressure or the accusation, well, you're a racist, if you actually have facts. You don't like it. It's never going to be fun. Like, I would never lie to my kids and say, like, oh, it doesn't matter at all that the entire peer group at your school thinks you're a racist. It sucks. Okay. Yeah. But it's a lot less sucky when you realize literally how untrue it is. Like, when you can feel good about having some data to back up your belief that that's not true. There's just not enough, I think, counter information coming at these kids. And that's why you see so many of them out there LARPing and rioting, and they don't know any different. And here's something else I want to say too, is that the kids who do figure it out one where they come across somebody who's an influence who helps them see the light. They get red pilled, whatever happens. There's a process. It's like a depression that they go through, almost like a withdrawal, from drug addiction or something, that once they've been red pilled, it's not an immediate like euphoria, like, oh yes, I've been saved from this horrible cult. It's a terrible, terrible feeling to realize that you've wasted even a day, but certainly years of your life living in a world that doesn't exist, believing things that aren't true, and worst of all, harming people. Like if they get to the point where they are one of those LARPers out there breaking windows, or they actually hurt someone, or they've just said horrible things, or they've wrecked the relationship with you. It's pretty traumatic to come off of that. I mean, Lily Tang Williams talks about where it wasn't even her choice, but she grew up in the Red Guard in China. Mm-hmm. And then when she came to this country and realized all the lies and how much hadn't been true, and what things that she even, nothing terrible, but the things that she believed and participated in, she said it was horrible that so many years of her life wasted. That's why she's like, I'm not shutting up. I will never shut up. You're never going to see me shut up, because I had 40 years of just waste. And I think when we, as parents, when we think about that, they're like, do you want your child to just endure? Is that what you want them to do for 13 years? Just endure school? No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something you really got to actually take something away from. There's a kind of an analogy I thought of earlier this morning. It's for some reason I was talking to my daughter about something, but I told her I learned to swim at a very young age. I learned how to swim because when we went to a pool or the lake, my parents threw me in the deep end, not like slowly walked me in. And that's not the perfect thing to do with all kids. Again, all kids are different. Just saying, I don't want to get sued for this.
Trauma. It's great. No.
Exactly. But yeah, so that's a way to do it. And then there are parents who will put the floaties on their kids. Okay. That's a good way to learn for a while, but eventually those floaties deflate, or they rip. And then at a certain point, the parent has to make a decision. Do I teach my child how to swim, or do I keep buying floaties? And then it's going to get to a certain point where there are certain parents who are going to start draining the water out of the pool. Out of the pool until everyone can stand on the bottom of the pool and they're not swimming at all. And now to go on with the kid analogy, you're just in a kiddie pool of urine and Band-Aids. And that's our educational system right now. It just lowered the standards for everyone, or eliminated the standards completely, so everyone can just stay afloat by standing there and not learning anything and not actually change their position. There's no tangible skill that they can take to the next level that's going to help them continue to learn and be prepared to be an adult in reality. Right. So I think there's got to be some sort of takeaway. And if your takeaway is activism, you're doing it wrong. You're doing education wrong. You're preparing these little versions of adults to grow up in the real world and continue, success and prosperity that we have right now.
Well, I think it's, it is absolutely child abuse to teach children right now that the world is an awful place, or that the world, that this country in particular is an awful place. A, because it's not true, and B, because even if it weren't true, that's not how you solve problems. That's not how you solve problems. I mean, if you saw a parent standing on a street corner telling their child the things that schools tell the kids, life is terrible and it's awful, and people are racist and oppressive, and oh, by the way, you're one of the oppressors. Like if a parent was doing this, you would want to intercede. You'd be like, "What is your problem?" You're teaching your child to be fearful, fragile, afraid. Like just mistrustful, angry. You're putting negative emotions into a small person on the basis of your own feelings. It's, projection, whatever. Parents are counseled not to do that. If you come out of a bad marriage, they have a divorce situation, or somebody dies or something like that happens, one of the first things I say is, you need to keep the adult. You need to protect the children from too much of this. This is not your chance to project all that onto your little kid, because you will damage them. And yet that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. Everything is a leading question. In what ways does this harm everything? In what ways is the world ending in 12 years? Let's talk about how the world's going to end if we don't do something. Climate alarmism, then, the part about like, maybe you're not really what you think you are in terms of gender. your parents have been lying to you all this time is the implied message there. For 6 years, your parents called you, Jenny or John and told you you were a girl or a boy and so forth. And now the school's going, yeah, they might have lied to you about that. That's, might not be true. That's what they're doing. That if we saw a parent doing that about the other parent or about somebody, we would say that's abuse. Why don't we say it when it's school? That's the question that I have. And it's what I want parents to get real loud about, is to say, you can teach my child subjects and basic skills. You may not teach my child thoughts. You may not teach my child ideas. And when I say teach, I put it with in quotes, you may not tell.
Yeah.
You may not tell.
That's why I'm thinking this is a bad game of Jeopardy, where you give the answer and the answer is racism in every single quadrant there.
Exactly.
And you just got to figure out the question, what is math racism? What is American history racism? What is Western history racism? It's always the same answer. And that's the problem when you give answers to questions that haven't been asked yet. And they're just say, here's the answer. Now you guys figure out the questions to it and figure out how they all can lead to the same answer, rather than saying, this is how you think about something. Look at observe and try to figure out, why is this thing happening?
And that's then literally what parents in the audience need to know is that the current definition, because you know how they change the meaning of words all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Critical thinking doesn't mean what we think it means. We think it means, applying reason and analysis and looking for data or evidence and then evaluating whether a hypothesis is, valid or an argument is valid. No. Critical thinking means what you just described. The answer is racism. The answer is racism. Now go out and find it. Be critical of everything with that idea in mind. Find the racism. It's in Dr. Seuss. Oh my God, it's in Curious George. Look, it's over here. That's critical consciousness, is start to become aware of all the ways in which the world sucks, according to the definition of suck that we've just given you. And now congratulations, you've succeeded. You are now a critical thinker. No, you're not. You're a robot repeating the creed, the dogma of a cult. And that's why, like I said, the only way to arm the kids is to tell them that that's not what thinking is. Thinking looks like, and you show them what it looks like, you model it, and you get them to develop their own philosophy or worldview, even in a small version when they're little, and just interrupt all of that. And that's for the people who can't run for school board, go to all the school board meetings, show up everywhere, be a thorn in their side, which obviously is recommended if you can't pull your kid out. But you've got to interrupt this process some way, because, like I said, would you let your child go off would you willingly drop them off at the Scientology building every day? Unless if you're not a Scientologist, of course.
Well, you assumed that I'm not, but yeah, no, I wish I could hang out with Ted Cruz every once in a while, or not Ted Cruz, the other Cruz.
You mean
I'd rather have Ted Cruz. Yeah, Tom Cruise. There we go.
Right. But no, I mean, that's, people, we hear that and we're like, well, no, I wouldn't do that. That's crazy. Okay. But guess what?
Exactly. Yeah. So I know we're running up against 2 hours, and I have to do a little bit of parenting and feeding my daughter eventually.
Yeah, we got to wrap up.
But if I could end this with a question that I asked you that I really liked your answer when I asked you, I think last time we talked, if I may.
Yeah.
The question kind of went, if you're a parent and you have problems with the school, do you think that every parent has the capability of homeschooling their kids if they prioritize it high enough? Now, I'm going to restrict this question to 2-parent households. I think 1-parent households have already kind of stepped back, whether it's, through their own actions or, the death of a parent or something like that. Obviously, there's externalities there. But do you think if parents were to prioritize it high enough, no matter what their conditions are at the time, do you think they'd have the ability to do that?
Yeah, with all your caveats and everything, and trying as hard as I can to be delicate so that people don't think I'm judging if they choose not to, because I am an individualist, and so you have freedom of choice. It's you
I'll
choose.
do the judging here. I'm the Catholic. I'll do the judging.
Whatever.
Judging.
But if you're speaking strictly pragmatically, do people have the capability? Absolutely. Yes, you do. It looks a lot different than people imagine. I think people hear the word homeschool and they picture, first of all, home. They think it has to happen physically in their dwelling. And then they hear school and they think it has to look or approximate school or schooling. And I think that's why I wish we had a different term for it, whether it's home-based learning, independent learning, alternative education, come up with some other name rather than homeschool, because it conjures up all kinds of, on the one hand, it conjures up the Duggars and everybody's sitting around the kitchen table playing the violin and, wearing clothes from the last century, whatever. It's not that. It's you with your family sitting down and, as you said, prioritizing education under your own authority and your own design as one of the things that you place up there with choosing where to live or, how to order your household or what job to take or any of the other decisions you make about your life. And saying, okay, well, obviously job is really important. It's got to make a living, keep the roof over my head. So the hours I work are from here to here. The hours you work are from here to here. And then that leaves these hours that we have left. And what do we do in the summer for childcare? Okay, we do that. Is there any way to approximate that during the year? Let's see if we can figure out something similar to what we do in the summer when the kid's not in school during the year. Is that possible? Are there other people in our community that are in the same boat we're in? Let's see if we can find them on Facebook. Social media has just made this so much easier. Look, oh my God, in my town, in my county, there are 17 different homeschool groups of different varieties and religious, not religious, whatever. Oh, wow. I bet I could find a little community of people. So it's you go about the process the same way you would, like I said, like a job hunt or a house hunt or something else. And you just sit down and prioritize it like that, where it's going to work around your family. You don't try to fit into school hours. You're not trying to organize it so that a room in your house is devoted to school room or something. You can do that, but you don't have to. I know people who are homeschooling in small pods in the inner city at night around day shifts that they work. Or somebody's working a night shift, somebody's working a day shift, or they both work day and the kid is with grandma or with an aunt or an uncle or a neighbor or whatever during the day. And during that day, they're having stories read to them, or they're just working on workbooks, or they're watching documentaries all day. They take away the screens for X amount of hours and they watch. You'd learn more watching quality documentaries in some cases than going to school. Okay. They surround them with books and then they say, when I get home at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, we're going to spend half an hour, we're going to do some math that you can't do on your own or whatever. And that's the other thing. People think you got to spend 8 hours schooling your kid because that's what they do at school. But I got news for you. They don't spend 8 hours teaching your kid either. If you distill down, it's kind of like those people who go work in a cube. If they're honest with themselves, maybe they put in 3 hours of actual work the whole day, maybe 2. It's no different in a school. The rest is hurry up and wait, stand in a line, get into the work as a group, watch the teacher, sit on your Chromebook, try to sneak in text to your friends. Even in kindergarten, you're not spending 8 hours doing things. It's mostly childcare, okay, by people who don't like your children and want them to be indoctrinated. But anyway, if you look at it that way and you realize I really only, and it's more hours the older they get, but guess what? The benefit is the older they get, the more they can self-serve. And you don't have to wait forever. My 7-year-old had a little box with her work that I put in there for her to do. So I could go off and do other stuff on the computer all day or whatever. And she would just go in there and be all proud of herself. That's her thing is little kids, 7 and 8, they really like to be all self-sufficient. Most of them. They're like, my work, and so there's a great number of them that actually like being in charge of themselves. I have a harder time with my older kids, believe it or not. They're fully capable. But after going back to public school for many years, I've have to stick them with a coddle prod because school taught them to be lazy. They got such good grades in public school with the dumbed down standards that they're like, what? When they were little, oh my goodness, I didn't have to do anything. It was here's the work. They self-serve. So they were able to do school in hour and a half, 2 hours a day. The rest of the time they played, they did whatever. My eldest daughter was reading at college level ability. I had to be very selective of books because they weren't appropriate, right? I ran out of books that were age appropriate. She could do that when she was 8 years old. And it's not because I'm a genius or she's a genius. She just wasn't held back by any arbitrary limits of okay, now stop. When she went into public school, they didn't have a reading level for her, obviously. So they made her tutor other kids. They made her read to other kids because they didn't know what to do with her. So, anyone can do this. Or conversely, if you observe that your child is struggling early on, you can get in there with remediation. You can get in there and say, all right, we got to deal with this. I got to find out somebody who can help with a reading specialist. Maybe my child has dyslexia. that you can do that. The school won't tell you because it's going to cost them money. And if you're not like watching and asking, when they go, no, it's fine. That's fine. That's fine. If you don't push that and say, it's not fine. Do something. Mm-hmm. You're talking to be 10, 11 years old before you find out because you pulled them and sent them to somebody privately that your child has dyslexia and needs extra help. And by this point, the kid hates to read, hates school, is falling behind, feeling terrible about themselves. Worst case, their behavior problem. Because learning disabilities undiagnosed can cause behavior problems. But when you're doing it at home, they can go at their pace, you can go at your pace. It's whatever you want it to be. So yes, if you prioritize this and you realize this is what they did for thousands of years. This is what they did till the 1880s in the United States. They didn't have a public school system.
But they were all racist. I don't know why.
Black children had the same literacy rates as white children until public schools came into being.
Yeah.
Actually, they still did until desegregation. And now I'm going to say that and people go, oh, the reason we learn is pro-segregation. Hell no. Segregation is evil. But the one upside was they were protected from the low expectations of the public school that said, oh, no, because you have high expectations of your own kids, when you're trying to protect your own kids. So that's my answer. Yes, you can.
And I already took some of these strategies that we talked about previously, threw them over at my fiance, and we're actually going to try to implement some of them this summer to see if it'll help supplement her, I'm going to say, subpar year in education in our area, where they just started go into full-time school 4 days a week ago. So
right,
going to help her catch up. And yeah, if it works out, I'm definitely going to consider doing full-time. But if anyone here is from my community and not in Deb's community, I don't know what you're doing, but make sure to join. I know you have a lot of great tips like that
Thanks.
During all your videos. So that's why I really like your stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. Likewise, please check out Engineering Politics. You've got the podcast on YouTube. This will be made into a podcast, and you might even take clips. I don't know. You're good at that. I'm not so good at clipping. But regardless, it'll be both places, so you can listen if you miss parts of it. We hope to make this a regular thing. We might get more organized about what we talk about. We're just kind of feeling our way here, but thank you for everybody for coming and for listening to us and adding your 2 cents. But I hope, like I said, I hope that everybody is just empowered. That my goal is to just encourage people, empower people, and have them realize they're not crazy. You're actually very sane. And, go towards the fire. Speak out, even in a small way. Speak out.
Yeah. Don't apologize for loving your kids.
No.
That's a big one to me. Like they're the most special thing in your life, and you got to take care of them. That takes some investment on your part.
Yes, very much so. So, all right, I'll check you. I'll see you in the back end of this. And thanks everybody for coming. And we'll see you next time.
Guys.
Bye.
All right, there it is. I hope you enjoyed that conversation, because I know I did. Make sure to show Deb some support and join the Reason We Learn Locals community at thereasonwelearn.locals.com. And you can find her on Twitter at Insomnochick, and subscribe to her channel on YouTube. If this live stream is well received, we're considering doing this as a live stream event, monthly or even weekly. So smash that like button, as the kids say, and make sure to let us know if you want us to continue doing this. And as to where you can find me, you can follow me on Twitter at ENG_politics. Check me out on my YouTube channel by searching Engineering Politics. Check out my ThinkSpot page by searching Engineering Politics on ThinkSpot. But, as usual, the best way to interact with me, get my newest content, and support this podcast is the Engineering Politics Locals community. I strongly urge you to join this growing community at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. I appreciate your consideration. Let's build a community together. Thank you for listening. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast.